Good morning, this is Dominic with TheBackVlog. So recently, and I started this months ago, but recently I finally finished the PlayStation 1 Serial Experiments Lain game. I started this thing back in March, and I finished the first disc around April, and then I just fell off of it. I think obviously because I was emulating it, because while I do have a Japanese PlayStation 1, I do not have $800 to spend on a PlayStation 1 game, much less import it from Japan. So I emulated the game, and I think because of that, I don't really like sitting at my computer desk, which is why I'm not in a hurry to finish my Steam library backlog right now. I'm worried about the physical media stuff. But I think maybe that's why I fell off of the game. But yeah, and then I finally finished disc 2 maybe 2 weeks ago, right before the convention, which I will also talk about in a later video. And this game is crazy. First of all, because of the gameplay loop, it's not really a game more so as it is a visual novel kind of thing. And the narrative is given to you in these tidbits of information that you access through nodes. There's any given amount of nodes on a specific level, but you're basically in a cylinder and you're moving up the levels of the cylinder, and each level has all these nodes that you can access to gain diary entries from Lain or her therapist in this game, or their therapy sessions, or the therapist's diagnosis of Lain. I played it on an emulator. I didn't play it on the laingame.net web browser version. And this is the first game I've emulated on PS1. So I don't know if my emulator has performance issues or not, because this isn't really the game that you're going to be able to tell with it. But there seemed to be some sort of input delay, and the game was very slow. I don't know if that's the game or if that's the emulator. The cutscenes in the game played smoothly at a normal frame rate, and the sound effects were in time with my controller inputs. It's just that the actual movement and rotation and increasing and decreasing levels of the cylinder, that was way delayed, and I don't know if that was the game or not. It could have been, for all I know. But yeah, if you're gonna play this thing, you need patience. I'm a very patient person, but I can definitely see somebody not wanting to play this because it's not even really a game. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is probably the steepest barrier to entry I have ever had to jump over when experiencing a piece of media. And this is all before I knew there was a web browser version of it. I guess the easiest way to play this would be laingame.net, which is a fully playable version of the game in a browser window. And there's actually subtitles, and there's different languages for these subtitles and everything. So if you're interested in playing it, that's probably the way to go. And I think there's controller support too. But the way that I played it was, first of all, figuring out how to use an emulator, because I haven't really explored that world yet. So I had to learn how to do that, and then get a Japanese PS1 BIOS so I could play this Japanese PS1 game. And then I found an English translation PDF, and it was a 700-page PDF. I was just kind of scrolling to each thing in as sequential order as possible. And yeah, there's a very steep barrier to get to this point, which honestly I kind of appreciated. It kind of put me in the headspace of the game a little bit more. That being said, the headspace of the game that you're put in while playing is not a very good one. It's a very psychologically complex game, and it's very unnerving. The vocal performances in this are phenomenal, and they're so naturalistic, and when people lash out, I was freaking jump scared by some of the things in here. some of the things that people say in this game and the manner in which they are said is very uncomfortable. And this game is really not for the faint of heart. You know, they're delving into a lot of like really deep psychological concepts and theories and like mental health issues. And it's very, very detailed. I think if you're especially susceptible to mental illness or, you know, existential dread, maybe steer clear, especially when it comes towards like the later parts of this game where it kind of brims on the edge of the suicidal. That's not really something I can recommend to someone unless I know they can handle it. Just be warned going ahead that it's not for everybody. The first time I played this game, I actually did do disc 2 around April, and I finished it technically. I accidentally reached the end point of the game. I triggered the end right before I realized that you shouldn't do that. When you access the last node of each specific category, either the therapist diary or Lain's diary, or the counseling sections, and I think the diagnosis also, but I'm not sure. It triggers the end game sequence, and then it shoots you back to the beginning. And I did not mean to do that. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll come back to this at a later point. I am going to go into spoilers a little bit for the story here. At some point, you know, because the whole thing with Serial Experiments Lain, one of the ideas expressed in, you know, both the game and the show is the idea of identity and, you know, different personas that people put on in different contexts, especially when it comes to the usage of the internet. You know, there's a lot of that in the PS1 game where, you know, Lain is kind of two different people at different times, and it's like a gamble as to which one she's being, which Lain. And there are points whenever she starts to get into the therapist's head, and the way that she creeps into the diary entries of the therapist it's actually horrifying. It's like, that's pure psychological horror right there. It's really, really well done. It's so creepy. Honestly, like, another good way to, like, if you really want to get into the vibe of the game, and like I said, the vibe is not a good one, you know, play the game alone at night, lights off, and, you know, just go ham. And once you get to those later game sections, it's gonna freak you out, because it's so well done. Like, the writing is so patient and clever, and that is aided by the incredible performances of Lain and the therapist, and they're just vocal performances, and it's so good. There is so much fear in the therapist's voice, and it's so believable. I wrote down, Lain is doing Live Forever As You Are Now, which is the Alan Resnick short film, Adult Swim infomercial, Live Forever As You Are Now, where he basically digitizes himself and and creates a like a 3D model of himself, and basically just uploads his consciousness so it can, you know, replicate who he was at that point in time when he made it to live on for eternity after Alan Resnick dies. And Lain basically does that in this game. So that's funny. And then the last thing I guess I want to talk about is the post game, because you know, whenever you beat the game, there's a lot of nodes that you don't get the first time around, and then there's a lot of nodes that you do get the second time around. I didn't do any of the subsequent playthroughs, and there are like massive plot threads that are revealed to you on subsequent playthroughs. I feel like the bulk of the story is there upon the first playthrough. It's just that future playthroughs kind of contextualize things. some of these nodes are, like some of the ones that they introduce to you are really interesting because Lain is referring to you, the player, the name that you kind of give yourself at the beginning, which is really interesting and a pretty creepy concept for having come out in like 98, I think. As for the way it's implemented, it is very rudimentary, but it was still pretty, it was still, the thought was there. It was really interesting. The fact that Lain would talk to you specifically, but it just sounds too robotic to be creepy. Which, I guess if you say that out loud, it does sound like it should be creepier since it is robotic, but it's just not as advanced as if something like this nowadays did something like that. So when I said the subsequent playthroughs give you more context as to the story, that actually, what actually happens actually does recontextualize what I thought was happening in my first playthrough. Because there is this one character who we never get to meet that Lain says she's friends with, and the therapist is saying, or she's like of the belief that this friend of Lain's does not exist. And on my first playthrough, and I guess my only playthrough, I really did believe the therapist as well. I thought it was just Lain like fucking with her, or some sort of entity fucking with Lain. But it turns out that I guess that person actually was real, and it gives you proof on a future playthrough, which I never did, but it is really interesting to know that it does kind of shape your view of the events the more that you do play this game. I just have better things to do, or not better things to do. I mean, I do have better things to do, but I also have better things to play, which I'll talk about at some other point. But yeah, Serial Experiments Lain for the PS1 was an incredible experience. A very slow and I can't say mind-numbing personally, but I could see how somebody would find this a mind-numbing experience. A very dark game, and not for everybody. Definitely not for everyone. But if you really like Serial Experiments Lain, the show, the anime, I would definitely check out this game because it is incredible. It's not even really a supplement. It's like a whole separate canon, and it's really interesting. But yeah, it was pretty good.